Namaste, my friend. Welcome to Bhakti Yoga Conference here at Harvard Divinity School. This is an opportunity to bring together prominent voices from the world of Bhakti Yoga, scholars, monks, yogis, spiritual leaders, people from all walks of life to share their lives, to share what they've learned with us as we navigate ourselves, this spiritual journey. My name's Happy Jack. I'm the founder of Happy Jack Yoga and a Master of Divinity student at Harvard. And it's really our wish, our hope for you is that you walk away from this conversation inspired with new ideas, with a new perhaps outlook, distinctions on how to move forward in your spiritual path. It's pretty amazing. It's starting to go viral a little bit. We've got over 3,000 registrants from around the world, and it seems to keep growing. So thank you so much for those of you who are registered and catching the recording. Huge thanks to those of you who are here live with us. And if you have any questions, at the end, as always, we're going to save time for a Q&A. Share your questions in the chat or raise your virtual hand. But I'm very excited to bring and welcome our guest today, a dear friend of mine. And so I'm gonna read a few words about Jess, and then we'll turn it over to him. But Jess is a doctoral student at Boston College, working in comparative theology and comparative religion, particularly between Hindu and Christian traditions. His current research focuses on theological resonances between Vaishnava bhakti practices and those found within the realm of Christianity. Further specialty includes the 20th century Hinduism, North American Hinduism, and work with Hindi and Sanskrit as research languages. Jess is also engaged in interreligious dialogue and interfaith events, academically and within local communities. Jess works with the Boston Theological Interreligious Consortium, as well as an event coordinator and facilitator for the Interreligious Leadership Certification Program, and has been a community interfaith organizer for many years. Jess also has nearly a decade of experience as an educator in public and private schools in California, where he's from. Further fields of interest include hybrid religious belonging, spirituality and mysticism, contemplative practices, music and religion, theopoetics, I don't even know what that is, but that sounds, I get a sense, new religious movements and religious pluralism. And I just got to say, Jess, he's a good friend. He's in one way, he's a peer. We've studied many courses together with Professor Clooney at Harvard Divinity School, but you're also a guide and a mentor. You've been a teaching fellow for many of us at Harvard. And, personally, I'm just inspired by your love for bhakti, your love for music, how you bring the two together. And what I really appreciate is that you can be so, connected and grounded in your Christian upbringing. And I know we've got many beautiful Christian brothers and sisters here on this call, and yet so open to and inspired to learn from other traditions such as bhakti and Vaishnavism, and finding a way to identify within, these different contexts. And I think that's very, very refreshing and very inspiring. And so the session today is called Love of God, Christian Bhakti, and Hinduism in Dialogue. My friends, if you're ready to get started with Jess, please throw your arms in the air and loudly chant Haribol. Beautiful to have you here with us, brother. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Oh, thank you. That's awesome. Yeah, the honor and privilege is all mine. This is great. Yeah, nice things. It's kind of humbling to see the amount of guests and like the level of guests you have is also like, woo. Hopefully people take something away from what I'm about to share.
Hey, we will for sure. We will. Thank you for the kind words. And it's true. So to give you context, many of the people here are yoga teachers, yogis, spiritual seekers. Some, I'm seeing Kenneth up there, a fellow Canadian up the road. And so some of us have, found bhakti in recent years, and others have, kind of come through the yoga path. There's also scholars on the line. We're seeing our friend Skip from Yale/Harvard. And so there is a big audience, but I would say the majority of us are, from the yoga community, and we've kind of discovered bhakti in the last, few years, and it's touched us and inspired us. And I know the same has happened with you, you've for more years, but I'm really looking forward to, and I guess I want to say as well, because many of our students, many of us come from a Christian culture and upbringing and going to Sunday school, and it's beautiful that we can connect with Jesus, and there's many of us who are also kind of open to these other traditions and other paths, and we see that in you. So I'm very looking forward to your presentation.
Nice. Well, yeah, I guess I should dive right in then. I've got a PowerPoint that'll probably go most of the time, but I'll leave time for questions at the end for sure.
Beautiful.
Um, yeah, and like I said, actually, it's a good the title. I went for pure shock value on this Christian Bhakti, which is, I'll prove the truth of that, but also, yeah, just because I know and I've seen some of the sessions from this conference before, and I kind of get the gist also too. A lot of people we're coming from a westernized Christian background, whether you know it or not. I mean, most of I don't want to get into a whole rant about like colonialism and stuff, but the whole world's been Christianized to some extent. But I want to kind of show in a positive light how these two practices have a whole bunch of similarities, to put it, I don't know, easily. So let's jump in here. So the agenda, I'm going to give a quick explanation of comparative theology, which is my field and which is the field that me and Jack have mentored under at Harvard. That's how we know each other. Kind of an explanation of what that is, some examples, some samples of it. Quickly talking about bhakti as cemented in the Hindu tradition. I deliberately called this in dialogue with Hinduism because I know a lot of people kind of I just heard in the last session, if you were on the last session with Raghunath, where he jokingly made a comment. He's like, "Well, what am I? Am I in a cult or what is this thing? What am I doing chanting?" Like, because for Westerners, it's kind of like, "Whoa, okay, I've joined this bhakti practice, and like, is this a new thing? Is it like what's going on?" I want to just kind of for practitioners show a bit of the historical like integrity and continuity between that, and his bhakti is firmly rooted in the Hindu tradition since like the inception of Hinduism, basically. Then I'm going to give some examples of bhakti saints in the Christian tradition, and then we'll go to some questions. So first, talk about this word theology. A lot of people are always like, assume it's like synonymous with Christianity, and it was for a long time. I mean, it comes out of the Christian tradition, but it just means the study of religious faith, practice, and experience, especially the study of God and God's relation to the world. So there is Islamic theology, there's Hindu theology, there's so and so theology, everything like that. So don't be turned off by the word. It's just a lot of these academic terms. Yeah, people get the gist of this. We just gotta dress it up a little fancier for the academic audience. Um, so the intentions and approaches of comparative theology, and obviously comparative, when I use that phrase, comparing theologies, comparing beliefs about God, practices relating to different religious traditions. So it started kind of as a discipline. I mean, it's been an ongoing discipline, but formally, kind of honestly not the prettiest context. The polemic apologetic approach was basically like my religion is better, more complete, or superior to yours. To study another tradition to either disprove the other tradition or show the inferiority of another tradition. And Christians have been guilty of this forever. Every tradition has been guilty of this to some extent. I mean, Hindus used to debate with Buddhists all the time to prove them wrong, to show their inferiority. It goes every which way, every combination you can think of. Islam, Christianity, Christianity, Islam. It happens everywhere. So the next kind of rung up on this approach, if you will, for me is I've just called it an accepting practice of comparative theology. It's like my tradition can gain some inspiration from yours on certain points. And I think that's kind of basically where we are almost as a global culture these days, is most people have a decent amount of respect and even admiration for other practices. And then you get into this real deep, I don't know, into the trenches of comparative theology, at least for myself, interreligious learning and interreligious theology. So putting doctrines and belief systems aside, even temporarily, what can we learn about God together? So, and I say for me personally, because all these approaches are still happening. There's still, right now, there's plenty of Christians, there's plenty of Hindus alive right now practicing, theology, studying their stuff to prove the other wrong. It's not like that practice has stopped at all. So I'm focusing on this last one about interreligious learning, interreligious theology. Skip the slide. So, and I want to start right away with just kind of an attention grabber. This isn't directly related to bhakti practice, but it is a great example, and it's I think you'll get the gist of what's going on here. So, how to get an attention grabber going on here first. On the left, we have Jesus washing the feet of his disciple, Peter. On the right, we have Krishna washing the feet of his friend slash, I don't know if you would call him disciple, but yeah, I guess in a way, worshiper, Sudama. So right away, the imagery, it just begs comparison. I mean, for me and a lot of this stuff, it comes out of just noticing these things naturally, which I think a lot of us do anyway. So let's break this down a little bit, show you what like a comparative theologian would kind of do in an instance like this. First, you look at the text. A lot of the stuff is textual based, so and you depending on your focus, you would get really in the weeds with this stuff. You'd be looking at languages, translations, commentaries, and all this. I'm just giving the super quick overview, just basic. So the first one is from John, Gospel of John, chapter 13, verses 1 to 17. This is the Christian gospel. So I don't know if I want to read all this stuff. I'm kind of being mindful of time here. So basically, the gist of it is they're all sitting together. Jesus is like, I'm going to wash your feet. Starts getting ready. He tells Peter, he, takes off his clothes, puts on a towel. Peter's like, you're not going to wash my feet. What are you talking about? Like, you're my teacher. At this point, they're already calling like Jesus, like Lord. You're like, I can read maybe some of this part down here around verse 8. Peter said, oh, sorry. You shall never wash my feet. Jesus answered, unless I wash you, you will have no part in me. When he had finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes and returned to his place. Do you understand what I have done for you? He asked them. You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I have set an example that you should do as I have done for you. So right away, let's just jump straight. Let's just read these texts together here. So this is from the Bhagavad Purana, Srimad Bhagavatam, sometimes called 10th canto, chapter 80, verses 20 through 26. This one I will read just for context. Lord Krishna seated his friend Sudama upon the bed. Then the Lord, who purifies the whole world, personally offered him various tokens of respect and washed his feet, O king, after which he sprinkled the water on his own head. He anointed him with divinely fragrant sandalwood, aguru, and kumkum paste, and happily worshipped him with aromatic incense and arrays of lamps. After finally offering him betel nut and the gift of a cow, he welcomed him with pleasing words. The residents of the palace said, what pious acts has this unkempt, impoverished Brahmana performed? People regard him as lowly and contemptible, yet the spiritual master of the three worlds, the abode of the goddess Shri, is serving him reverently. Leaving the goddess of fortune sitting on her bed, the Lord has embraced this Brahmana as if he were an older brother. So you can read these texts together in all kinds of different ways. You could be like, oh, Jesus did it better. Krishna did it better. Maybe the Christian tradition is taking this from the Christian tradition. Maybe they read this or were inspired. But you can do anything you want with this. They're just two texts. No one is even saying you have to read them together, except for people like me who say like, hey, there's something similar going on here. So reading them together, you get takeaways like, I just quickly threw these together. The verses are instructive. They're commending service. Both of them, the figures are leading by example. Both Jesus in the reading and Krishna are doing something that the rest of us are supposed to learn from. They highlight the closeness of God and the intimate concern of God, the personal care and attention. So it's said in both readings, this is the Lord. He's the teacher. He's the Lord of the three worlds. In Krishna's case, wait, and he's washing the feet of the other guy. It's reversing the roles of like kind of hierarchy, service. Teaching us to be humble, lesson of humility and lowly service, and also the reward. This is just something I threw there. The fruit of discipleship and closeness, because it's not that Jesus didn't wash everybody's feet. Jesus washed Peter's feet, who was actually pretty much the foremost disciple of Jesus. Krishna didn't wash everybody's feet. He washed this guy's feet because this guy was very devout, very humble, very pure. So it's kind of the reward also of being so close to God that you get these intimate interactions going on. So that's just an example of what you would do with comparative theology. And just further on this, so For me, and for I think most people practicing comparative theology these days, it's a response to religious diversity. It's a positive response because religious diversity and conflicting truth claims can lead to despair, doubts, confusion, disillusion, atheism, materialism. You get statements like, religions are all false and fake. Religion is the opiate of the masses, etc. Because, there's a billion people who believe this, there's another billion who believe that. They don't match up exactly. You guys are all off. You guys are all doing this make believe, whatever religion. Yeah, okay, cool, do your thing, whatever. So that's an approach, that's a response to religious diversity. It's kind of a common response. If you're trying to be logical about things, you're like, okay, you guys can't all be right. Whatever, something's going on here. So comparative theologians take the approach, at least ones like myself. I should speak more so for myself. That doing this kind of interreligious learning, it can provide a positive interpretation of religious diversity. And to quote the great Francis Clooney, which you'll hear more about in a bit, he's a professor at Harvard who's done this his whole life. He's the professor me and Jack have shared for several courses. So he says, noting even partial common ground can strengthen our own religious convictions. So, for example, I mean, yeah, I don't know if I want to use that exact example, but just seeing that people worship God in the same way as you in a different country in a distant time period can kind of reinforce your own faith, basically. You're like, oh, I'm not crazy; they're doing the same thing. You kind of reaffirmed by each other. But pushed even further, this is a deeper quote from Professor Clooney here. The fixed boundaries separating religions become all the less plausible because the theological insights arising in comparative study will push those boundaries. So the more and more you do this kind of work, Professor Clooney also often talks about being a marginalized like figure. You start to get like into this gray area. It's like, wait, actually that sounds true to me. This sounds true to me. The boundaries are dissolving at this point a little bit, and you're kind of in this odd space of like, wait, Christian, Hindu, what, does it matter anymore? And again, this isn't for everybody. Plenty of people, Professor Clooney included himself, will be like, no, I'm still a strict Christian, and I just admire this stuff. But at times I dabble here and there. So there's different ways to go about different takeaways that you get. So some examples of Hindu Christian comparative studies is this is not something that I've whimsically done or as I'm sure you all probably know, but this has got a long heritage here. This is a book called Christianity as Bhakti Marga. This is from 1927. The author is A.J. Appasamy. Appasamy is an Indian Christian, so Indian living in India who was Christian, and he wrote this. He kind of wrote this for a Christian audience, but he was framing it. I mean, right away, the whole topic of my lecture is right here in his book, Christianity as Bhakti Marga. He's framing it to Christians to help them understand what those Hindus are doing over there, to his audience. He's defending them a bit. He's like, they're not heathens, they're not idolaters, this whole baggage. They're not like polytheists. He's saying, you can think about, what they call Bhakti Marga is kind of basically what we call Christianity. He does this. He looks at one gospel, Gospel of John, gets really in depth in it. And in the end, he basically still says Christianity is, does it better, but he's pretty complimentary towards Hinduism, and he notices the resonances between the bhakti practice as pretty much the height of Christian practice. So a couple other ones here. Hindu God, Christian God. This is Professor Clooney, who we're going to still hear more about in a bit. How reason helps break down the boundaries between religions. So this book, he's taking thinkers all throughout history who have thought about God in similar ways from specifically Hindu and Christian traditions, and kind of just pointing out like, wow, isn't that quite fascinating how they come to similar like ways of thinking about God, basically. And you have specific texts like this, Loving God, Krishna, and Christ. So this is a Christian commentary on the Narada Sutras. This is a specific bhakti text. So this Christian scholar, Daniel Sheridan, just the whole book is Narada Sutras. He's reading them and he's commenting, how would a Christian react to this? What can a Christian take away from this? How does this resonate with the Bible, and so on? And these are just, these are a few examples. There's so many works like this. This one I chose mostly for the picture. This is Vedanta and Christian faith, but this figure, Bede Griffiths, is huge, huge, huge. He was a Christian monastic. He lived in India for most of his life. You see him, he looks, I mean, if you've been to India, if you know anything about it, this is like a full-on sadhu right here. This is, you would see this guy out there on the streets of India doing practice. He's a Christian. He started an ashram in India, and he has a whole his whole practice gets very intertwined. They're doing RT, they're doing different stuff in a Christian context. Writes commentary on the Bhagavad Gita, which is very interesting. For him, he's saying like, oh, I can't think of Jesus without thinking about Krishna. I can't think of Krishna without immediately thinking of Jesus. Gets pretty full blown into the both realms. Um, then we have some Hindu authors who've done the same thing. This is just, again, just a few examples. Second Coming of Christ by Paramahansa Yogananda. He's taking the whole, not the whole Christian Bible, some of the Gospels of Christian Bible, and he's uh, commenting, commentating on them from a Hindu context. So he'll take a Bible verse and he'll be like, "Oh, this is like the Upanishads. This is like the Vedas. This is like so and so sutra. This is what it means to Hindu practice." So it goes both ways. This is would be like an essay. I don't really want to get into this, but I'm just showing you this stuff is all over the place. Klaus Klostermaier is a professor. He's also Catholic. I think he might have been a priest himself too. Hridaya Vidya, sketch of Hindu Christian theology of love. He's talking about love between man and God. It's basically the same. The Bhakti tradition in Hinduism carries these same emphasis. I'm just going to skip to the second page here. I don't want to read a lot of this stuff, but basically his conclusion. Finally, love of God brings joy and bliss, an inner peace which gives birth to man's ultimate fulfillment through an identity of his being with God. This factor is essential to both traditions, as is further illustrated. And then the whole essay gets into basically, oh, yeah, Christian practice and bhakti are quite similar. We're doing the same thing. We're just loving God. Yeah, and if look at the bottom here is Reverend Klaus Klostermaier, Roman Catholic, PhD, all this stuff. I'm going to get into why I'm pointing that out in a second. So back to another Hindu author here, Vivekananda, Swami Vivekananda, his writing, Christ the Messenger. And this is a more pluralistic approach, a more kind of like all religions are the same kind of approach, which is not what I'm saying. This is not what a lot of the authors are saying. This is what Vivekananda is saying. Let us therefore find God not only in Jesus of Nazareth, but in all the great ones that have preceded him, in all that came after him, and in all that are yet to come. So he takes Jesus' philosophy to be true and good, and it's only a part of all the other true and great teachers that have come to the world. Again, I'm just showing these examples of how this comparative theology has been practiced by both traditions, and these are only the recent examples. There's stuff that goes way back. Swami Prabhupada, I'm sure a lot of you on this are probably familiar with. Great quote from him. Any religion, it doesn't matter whether Hindu religion, Muslim religion, Christian religion, if you are developing love of God, then you are perfect in your religion. And that sounds good. It sounds nice, but it's also good to remember too that Prabhupada isn't just saying this. He knows what he's talking about. Not only does he knows the Vedas, the scriptures. He studied at a Christian college. I'm not sure many people really know this. Scottish Church College in India. He studied some Bible, some Christian theology. So to him, it's not just something he's saying. He really means it. And we'll get more into this later also, but it's a great quote. So some of the methodology that I use and that most people use in the comparative theology realm is like an appeal to authority. That's why I was pointing out, oh, this is Reverend Klaus Klostermaier, PhD, because you don't want to just take anyone's word for it. Otherwise, it's not less meaningful. But what's the difference between oh, like my cousin said the Buddha and Jesus are the same, or my mom says this and that. That's cool. It's probably they might have truth to what they're saying also too, but things just make more impact, especially in the academic realm when you're appealing to somebody with authority, like scholars, saints, and especially in the religious realm, saints, swamis, acharyas, priests, longtime practitioners, etc., experts, basically. So all I'm doing in this whole thing is appealing to experts, as you'll see. A perfect example of this is the professor that I mentioned a few times, professor at Harvard, currently right now, Dr. Francis X. Clooney. So he spent his whole life doing this. He's kind of the pioneer of comparative theology in modern times. I'm going to talk about some of his work on Narayana. And just to briefly, if people don't know what's going on, I'm not sure how familiar everybody is, but Narayana is Vishnu, Vishnu is Krishna, Krishna is Ram. It's all the same thing. So when he's saying Narayana here, it's because it's from a specific South Indian tradition. That's their form of Vishnu, of what we call Krishna in a different tradition. But it'll apply, and you'll see why it applies historically also in a bit. So when appealing to the authority of someone like Professor Clooney, it's worthwhile to talk about why is he an authority. He's a PhD in South Asian languages and civilizations. He's been a Roman Catholic priest and a member of the Society of Jesus for 55 years. Extensive scholarship of Sanskrit and Tamil texts and traditions of Sri Vaishnavism. So you meet a figure like this, not only is he academically schooled in all the languages and all the texts, like beyond your wildest dreams, you wouldn't. This is an American priest. I'll just say he knows his Hindu theology better than like 99% of Indians that I know or Hindus that I know, because he's dedicated his whole life to it. That's what you would expect. He also knows his Christian theology. He's a priest. He's a practicing priest. So when this person says something, it has a bit more of a weight of authority to it than when when your grandma says like, "Oh, you can't say Krishna. You can't say I love Narayana." Well, ask the priest what he says. Ask the priest with the PhD in the thing what he says about it, and then maybe draw a conclusion about it. And again, I'm not to paint figures like this as if they're saying everything is the same. I think that's a fatal flaw of some comparative theological practices. It's all the same. It all blurs together. It's all God, right? You got to still maintain some nuance there. So that's not Clooney's approach, but you will see at times it gets there, gets close to that. So Clooney looks at the virtues of Narayana from a text, the 14th century text by Vedanta Desika, so Rahasya Traya Saram. I don't know if that's Sharam or Saram. So this is 14th century text, and it's describing in it. This is Sri Vaishnavism, by the way. This is South India Vaishnava practice. They have these. There's a chapter in this where Vedanta Desika is talking about the properties of Narayana, of of God, is the protector of all who has supreme mercy, without equals or superiors. His unsurpassed subtleness is the support of everything, infinite with the nature of bliss, pure and spotless, different than non-sentient matter, possessing countless unnamed attributes, sympathetic to those seeking help, ready to dispel ignorance, material and instrumental cause of everything. So this is who Narayana is all these things. And Dr. Clooney says from his book, Comparative Theology, Deep Learning Across Religious Orders, he says none of the qualities above are unique to Sri Vaishnavism. There is almost nothing that could not be accepted by the Christian. We as Christians can also evoke the name Narayana because we should not have objections to the divine qualities of Narayana as God. So once you learn who Narayana is, you're kind of like, as a Christian practitioner, you'd be like, wait a minute, that sounds like the God that I worship. My God is the material, instrumental cause of everything. He's the one that gives mercy, is the support of everything, is infinite, is the nature of bliss, all these things. It's kind of, this is a really cheap example, but I was just thinking, like it's like language. If someone says, asked you like in Hindi, oh, do you want some kana? You're like, well, I don't know. You got any food? Like, I want something to eat. I'm really hungry. And then they explain, oh no, kana, you put this in your mouth. It's like fruit, vegetables. It's cooked rice. It's like this. Oh, you mean food? Oh yeah, of course I want kana. Give me some kana. I'm hungry. So it's the same thing here. Once you learn who Narayana is, once you learn what they mean when they say they're talking about Narayana, you're like, oh yeah, that sounds kind of like the Christian God, actually. So this is why it's important that although you might have a well-meaning grandma or aunt or somebody who's like, oh, you can't say this, you can't praise Narayana. You're like, well, I don't know. Ask the priest what he says about that because he seems to think it's okay. So this is my appeal to authority, and I'm sorry, Professor Clooney, if he ever sees this and it feels like I'm mischaracterizing him. Let's go on here. And he's not the only authority I'm going to rely on, by the way. Some imagery here will help too to connect some things that I'm going to talk about in a second. Narayana, the four-armed form of Vishnu Narayana right here, always seen with Lakshmi, goddess of fortune, Lakshmi Narayana. And I should have pointed this out earlier when I read the text about washing the feet with Krishna. You notice that they referred to Shri in the text. They were equating, which I think in the story, I think it's Rukmini and Krishna, the figure that's with Krishna, his consort, his female consort. That tradition, pretty much when you get to the Radha Krishna tradition, it is Lakshmi Narayana. There's really no difference between these figures. I mean, there are actually important differences, but I'm going to kind of show the thread of how this is all connected and related to this point. Sorry, I'm checking the time here. Okay, give me 1 second here. I'm going to check the chat to make sure. I see some things in the chat we can get to questions later. Yeah, my pronunciation is not the best. Sorry about that. But yeah, I have the text that I was referring to if you want any sources on that later. So, getting to the audience, which I think some of the audience that I observed is Bhakti Yoga, the practice of loving devotion, part of the Hindu tradition? Is it a new spin off? Is it a modern phenomenon? Isn't Hinduism polytheistic? Is Bhakti purely sentimental and non intellectual? So, these are questions you might have. These are questions that scholars have dealt with. They're like, well, is Hinduism polytheistic? Is it, or what's going on here? I mean, so just to give you a brief trajectory of where bhakti fits in the overall scope of Hinduism. So I'm going to throw a whole timeline at you here. And it's going to be really quick. This is just for people who might kind of be new to bhakti practice or something, or might really not understand how the whole picture works. Um, So, and these are scholarly. This might be also interest of practitioners because every practitioner of every tradition pretty much is like, yeah, well, maybe not every tradition, but I know in Hinduism it's big. Like, oh, the Vedas are eternal. They manifest all the time. They're not from 1500 BCE. What are you talking about? Like, no, that's incorrect. I'm giving you whatever the scholars have said about this, historians, researchers. You don't have to accept anything here. I'm just showing you what happens in the academic realm when we're dealing with these things. This is a rough timeline of kind of Hinduism evolving here. So in the Vedas, you already have a notion of a singular like Brahman that everything emanates from. This Purusha figure creates the world, but is beyond the world always. There's already basically a notion of God. You can interpret it however you want. Hindus themselves debate about this all the time, but it's there. This whole strand of Bhakti Yoga going to the Sri Vaishnavism in the south, it all there's a thread. There's a coherent thread between the Vedas, the most ancient Vedas, and the Bhakti practice that some of you might be doing it right now. So the Vedas also with the Upanishads, which some of them they're already talking about Vishnu, they're already talking about Shiva as a deity who is like the god. You get to 600 BCE, and you've got the Gita. A little bit after that, you've got texts like the Ramayana, and these are purely super theistic. They have one god as the central figure. It's not a polytheistic system at all. There's other celestial gods and things going on here. I'm not going to give a whole rant about Hinduism, but I'm just pointing out the thread of bhakti. If you've read the Bhagavad Gita, you know Bhakti Yoga is one of like the principal teachings prescribed in there. Surrender to God, offer all your actions to Him. This is going back. This is essentially the roots of Hinduism. So, can you? Oh yeah, okay. This is almost like the Narayana thing also too. So it's connecting, and it helps connect those points a little bit too. So who is Krishna according to the Bhagavad Gita? Unborn and changeless. I'm just going to really briefly look at a couple of these. Supports the whole universe, is the source of life in all beings. These are Gita verses right here. He pervades the entire universe, is mother and father universe, the one true friend, the object of all worshipped, can free people from the bondage of karma, even if they offer their actions to him in devotion and love, etc., etc. And again, you can see, oh, wait, so this is also why Vaishnavas would be like, see, Krishna is Narayana, is Vishnu, it's the same qualities, the same character. And this is where a Christian can be like, wait a minute, father and mother of the whole universe, Lord, the one true friend. That kind of sounds like what I think God is too. So, all that to say, basically, at the heart of it, most, I think, scholars would agree. This goes across like Islam and Christianity and Judaism and stuff too, where they're like, yeah, okay, we're worshiping the same God. We got that. That's I mean, it sounds funny to say that, but a lot of the polemic approaches, especially like when traditions are first emerging, encountering each other, that was like the number one thing. You're slinging at each other. You're worshiping a false god. You're not even worshiping God. You don't even understand what's happening. I think now at this point, everyone is kind of like, okay, well, we're worshiping God, but how are we doing it? Well, maybe I'm doing it better than you. Maybe you're doing it better than me. Whatever. Um, Famous image of Krishna from Bhagavad Gita being all of those things all at once. I got to kind of just plow through this. So then we get to the Puranas. These are all the stories, the more detailed stories of Krishna. Puranas are kind of like the completing the Vedas with other info like cute baby Krishna, cowherd Krishna, eating butter, Yashoda, all these cool things that are kind of the heart of a lot of bhakti practice. These are kind of like the Puranic Krishna era. We get to these Bhakti poet saints here. This is a big point. These Alvars, this is South Indian Sri Vaishnavism related to the tradition that I was talking about earlier. They're already writing in a very sophisticated and beautiful way about devotion to Krishna, about it being above ritualistic practice, about it being kind of the heart of Hinduism, and particularly, I think I have one slide of Andal. Yeah, Andal is one of the female saints from this period when they all are. So she's incorporating dense Vaishnava theology into her devotional poems, devoted to Krishna in a romantic, embodied, and sensual longing. Um, and I do have a lot of stuff to get to, so let me just keep going through this. We get to the Nayanars, also the Shaiva poets doing the same thing that Shiva. Get to Ramanujacharya. This is also huge. This is huge, huge, huge. The point I mentioned about Bhakti is like, is it intellectual? Is it purely sentimental? Ramanuja is the one figure who is relevant for all the strains of Vaishnavism that came after. Systematic scholar. So this guy is basically, I mean, didn't have a PhD in India at the time, but he's like 10 steps beyond that. He's a linguistic master, you know, Vedas, citations, interpretations, refutations, philosophical arguments, like point by point breakdowns of stuff. He's argued, especially against other schools of Hindu thought, you know, that basically surrendered to God. He had a whole thing about the Sharanagati Gadyam is one of his works. The conclusion of all his studies of the Vedas is just basically surrender to God. Pictures of Ramanuja, if you've ever seen him, you should kind of be aware of him. Again, this is just the trajectory of all this bhakti practice, the thread. Then we get to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who most people probably have some notion of. We're at the 15th, 16th century here. We get to the bhakti movement, figures like Mirabai, Surdas, Tukaram, etc. Finally, we get to the 20th century. We get figures like Srila Prabhupada and ISKCON. Get Kripalaji Maharaj, who was one of the most recent Jagat gurus, who also said like bhakti is like the essence of all the Vedas, of all this stuff going back, you know, what scholars would say going back to about 1500 BCE. This thread is there. You just got to look for it. You have to know what you're looking for. So that's roughly where bhakti practice lands. This is a Swami that I study with most closely, Swami Mukundananda here kneeling down in front of his guru, who, if you Google like Jagat Guru, you'll see that there's really been like five, maybe six, like in the entire history of Hinduism. There's other gurus that have the title that their own followers basically give them the title, or they inherit the title as being part of an organization. But Jagat Guru Kripalaji Maharaj was elected by people that wanted to debate him, that went there to like, you know, either we're going to disprove this guy, or at the end of it, they were like, this guy is like the master of the Vedas. How this relates to the practice, his book Prem Ras Siddhanta, Prema Ras, like that divine love, philosophy of divine love is even how they translate it here in English, pretty much showing intellectually, systematically that bhakti practice is the heart of Hinduism. So, okay, I've got about 10 minutes, I think, to plow through the Christian figures. I know that was a lot of the Hindu stuff, but I wanted to throw that out there, especially after seeing that comment from Raghunath earlier when he was like, wait, bhakti practice, am I in a cult or what's going on? I mean, the question for Westerners who fall into like bhakti practice, it's kind of like, wait, how does this all fit? No one really explains it to you sometimes, so it's good to get a little grasp on it. So Christian saints and bhakti practices, how does this all relate? So the Jewish roots and Jesus. So Jesus, for those who don't know, he was Jewish, full-blown Jewish. He was a rabbi. He taught in the Jewish temples. He went through all the rituals. So in the Hebrew Bible, if Christian, Christians say like, oh, the Old Testaments. They're talking about stuff like Genesis, like Deuteronomy, all these texts that are actually part of the Hebrew Bible. They're part of the Jewish tradition. So when you see quotes like this, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and strength, most people are like, oh yeah, Jesus said that, right? Yeah, Jesus did say that, but he's getting that from his Jewish practice. So even the Christian bhakti also has like a long history that goes back thousands of years. So when you get around to Jesus saying this in Matthew 22 here in this gospel, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. He's directly quoting from Deuteronomy here. This is the first and greatest commandment, and the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. So if we get to the heart of Christian bhakti, obviously the heart of this Christian practice, it's based on Jesus. What is these are the first commandment? Love the Lord your God with your heart, soul, and strength. He's not saying to do, complicated rituals. He's not saying to do it. Honestly, I mean, objectively, he's not giving you much instruction, but that's the goal. So, let's look at it. And then we've got all these figures that come later to kind of explain it a bit. So I'm going through a little bit of some history of some Christian saints here, just to give you some context of why I calling this Christian bhakti. Origen of Alexandria is like a huge Christian figure. This is a couple of centuries after Jesus. This is, again, looking at the Hebrew Bible. There's a chapter in the Hebrew Bible called Song of Songs. And it's really this, if you've ever read the 10th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Purana with the Rasa Leela and all that stuff, Song of Songs is basically like the Christian equivalent. It's the one that all the Christian mystics are going to refer to. I'll read what I wrote here. So Origen interprets the Song of Songs not as a literal love poem, but as an allegory of the relationship between the soul and God. For Origen, the bride in the text symbolizes the soul, while the bridegroom represents Christ. Practitioners are encouraged to cultivate an intimate relationship with the divine. So in Song of Songs, there's all this kind of like almost like heated, almost, I don't know what you would call it, passionate, spicy kind of like poetry, like love poetry. Love, oh, where's my beloved? Where's the bride? Where's the groom? It's this basically woman and man longing after each other in a very romantic, like sensual kind of way, honestly. And I'm saying, like, well, obviously it's a symbol for the soul and God, or the soul and Christ and everything. So this tradition goes on and on and on, and we'll see. So we get other saints, and by the way, that was that was Origen. This is Gregory. This is Saint Gregory of Nyssa. Or again, I'm appealing to authority. These aren't just like the random Christian guys off the street. This has been canonically like just declared saint because they've been, vetted and verified by the church. People are like, yeah, okay, they really knew what they were talking about. And what is he talking about? The perfection of human nature consists in being united with God by a kind of devotion which leads the soul to love him above all things. Flash forward a bit here. We get to Bernard of Clairvaux. And I don't know why the text is like this, but so his whole text that he has on loving God, the title says it all. This is just some excerpts from that. I'm paraphrasing this slightly because the wording is a little odd, but the bride gathers flowers and fruit from the field the Lord has blessed. The heavenly bridegroom enjoys so much those perfumes that he enters willingly and often the chamber of the heart he finds decked with these flowers and fruits. The spouse enjoys greater familiarity by the fact that when she feels inclined, she may gather such fruits and flowers for the spouse as he enters. So his whole thing, this is heavily the bride and bridegroom. Obviously, this is inspired by that whole Song of Songs tradition, where again, he's using the same analogy of the soul is the bride, God is the bridegroom. You're trying to lure God into your heart. You're putting the flowers and fruits, and attracting, and God will come often into your heart, into the chamber of your heart. This phrase that I highlighted in bold comes up when we talk about certain like flavors of bhakti later, where the spouse enjoys greater familiarity by the fact that when she feels inclined. So it's that the formal relationship has kind of already dissolved at this point, which you see in a lot of the deep bhakti practices. Here, it's not just like, oh, I bow down, I love you, God. There is that reverence there also too, but you see it's an intimacy, the greater familiarity. The spouse has the greatest familiarity with the groom. So let's keep going. I want to kind of wrap this up soon, but there's a lot of good stuff in here. So St. Francis of Assisi, talk about sadhus, renunciants, monks. Francis is about as intense as you get. He was an austere renunciate, founder of the Franciscan monastic order. He was a wandering ascetic with one point of devotion. He's often having mystical experiences and visions. St. Bonaventure says about him, he's an example of perfect contemplation in action. I have a nice here of this picture sometimes speaks volumes, right? It says 1,000 words. Francis passed out in ecstasy after he has a vision of God. He's just like, boom, on the floor. Chaitanya, our medieval bhakti pillar, passed out in ecstasy. I mean, I'm not going to say much about it, but just drinking that. So the rule of St. Francis, I think I'm going to skip a lot of this too, but I thought it was just funny because he's, and again, this is essentially what Jesus told his disciples also too. He says, don't take anything with you. Have one tunic and a hood. Those who must may wear shoes. So he's telling his monks how they should live. He's talking about like vow of poverty, like complete renunciation, have nothing. And he's also encouraging people. He's saying if you're illiterate, don't worry about studying. Uh, Above all, they should wish to have the Spirit of the Lord working within them, and that they should pray to Him constantly with a pure heart. So again, this is kind of like the both spectrum of bhakti has. Bhakti requires a lot of knowledge, but he's also saying, and this comes up in a lot of the bhakti poets too. It's like, oh, I'm illiterate. Like, how am I even going to love God? I mean, love God with a pure heart. It's as simple as that. Prayer of Saint Francis. I just like the wording on this. But his command at the end is like, grant not so much that I be loved as to love. So that active loving. He's like, I don't even want love. I want to love. And again, I'm sorry, I'm skipping through this, but I do have some other points to get to. Saint Bonaventure, the one who's about a generation or two after Saint Francis. To obtain God, ask grace, not learning, desire, not understanding, the groaning of prayer, not diligence in reading, the bridegroom, not the teacher. Again, that intimate relationship, that kind of sensual, very close relationship, not the teacher. Even though these guys are extremely learned and like, they know all their scriptures and everything too, at the end they're saying it's actually about the intimate relationship, that love for God. Cloud of Unknowing Author. This is worth mentioning just because this is for 14th century Christian text, because I thought this has a lot of resonances to mantra. He says, on repeating the name of God, take thee but a little word of one syllable, for so it is better than two, the shorter it is the better. And such a word is this word God, or is this word love? These were capitalized in the text, by the way, for me. Choose thee whatever thou like best, and fasten this word to thine heart, so that it never go thence. This word shall be thy shield and thy spear, whether thou ridest on peace or on war. With this word thou shalt beat on this cloud and this darkness above thee, so you can attain God. So he's saying, repeat, take the word of God, or take the word of love. He's pretty much saying, take a short syllable, fasten it to your heart, chant it all the time, say it all the time, remember it at all times, peace, war, all this, and you're beating on the cloud of darkness to get to God. I think anyone who's practiced mantra chanting in Hindu context can obviously see the resonances there. Quick note just about Teresa of Avila, although there was a lot of juicy stuff in here. Her work, best known work is the Interior Castle, going deep into the chamber of the soul, wherein God is finally intimately encountered. And talking about spicy language here, this is not my wording here. The most inner chamber of the castle is the chamber where the soul and God have intercourse. So take that as you will. And we know a lot of the racy stuff that's in some of the bhakti practice also. And it's not to be taken so crudely or literally as that, as obviously she didn't mean it either. This was me being, so I started throwing some comparisons at you. I think I'll read this really quickly and then maybe we can get to some questions here, because I thought I started to point out resonances if they weren't obvious enough on their own. So Teresa, again, she's a 16th century Spanish saint, vetted by the church. She's not just an old grandma off the street. Fix our eyes on Christ and on his saints. Our minds will become ennobled. So satsang, hanging out, you put your mind on the right people, right association. Exclusive devotion to God. I put prema bhakti, selfless devotion. She doesn't remember that the soul, she always refers to the soul as like a she. She doesn't remember anything about a heavenly afterlife or personal honor. Everything in her is dedicated to honoring God. This phrase, this is from a song from a teacher that I know, like Nitya Seva. In the song, he's saying explicitly, I thought this was relevant for the Hindu context, because she's saying as a Christian, I'm not even worried about a heavenly afterlife. Like I'm not even thinking about that. And the song that I'm referencing right here specifically says, so I don't want moksha, I don't want liberation, I don't want anything. All I want is your eternal service. So yeah, resonance is there. They told her to keep tangible imagery of Christ, to keep remembering God. I'm just pointing that out as, darshan, genie, rupyan, remembrance of the form of God. She's talking about obeying your authorities. I put like guru parampara. The only remedy against deception lies in obedience to her teachers and reverence for God. This last one, she says to be a humble worm, to love everyone and be thought least of all. and maybe a pop quiz for someone at the end is like, this reminded me of the phrase like lower than the straw in the street. And if you know where that comes from the Bhakti tradition, you can let us know in a bit. But that call to humility and like non-recognition. So spiritual takeaways. Bhakti is a valid, even the most valid path to encountering God, according to many thinkers in both the Christian and Hindu tradition. You can be inspired by either. You can practice them both. You can practice them independently. You can do whatever you want. Authorities and scholars of both traditions have endorsed and vouched for the truth of the other. I had some quick, there's one I want to end with. Well, I think I have time just to briefly talk about this real quick. Meditate like Christ, he lost himself in love. This is the great Avadut Neem Karoli Baba. No organization, no rules. Some Hindu practices like reading the Ramayana, chanting Hanuman Chalisa. He's telling his, I don't know if you call them disciples or followers, whatever, to meditate like Christ. We have Self-Realization Fellowship of Yogananda, his commentary on the Bible that I mentioned earlier, where they have Christ and Krishna in the center. We have this closing quote. This is the last slide I have here from Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada. Srimad Bhagavatam states that any bona fide preacher of God consciousness must have the qualities of titiksha, tolerance, and karuna, compassion. In the character of Lord Jesus Christ, we find both these qualities. So that ends my little presentation here.
Jess, oh my goodness, man, that was so awesome. Thank you, thank you. Let's send some love, high vibes to Jess representing. Thank you for taking the time to put that together. Like so thoughtful and so thorough. And a couple of things I want to point out. Like one, I appreciate that. Like I mean, on one side, we could take one extreme where we see this in the world, and that's why there's war. Is that one religion or one tradition is saying this other tradition is wrong, and this is the only way, and that's wrong, and so that's one extreme, and there's probably nobody on this call in that camp. And then there's other people, as you alluded to, that say, hey, it's all the same. It's yeah, just pick one. It's all the same, and that's a little bit too diluted as well. But I love that you're really maturely and going to authorities and taking the time and engaging the ancient texts and looking for the similarities. And so I really appreciate the way that you put this together. And there's so much here. For those who are really serious about practice, I would encourage you to go back and watch this presentation again. But just in our final moments, a question that I would love to open with, knowing that you are a very avid Christian and lover of Jesus and practicer of that path. And you're also so open to bhakti, and you chant kirtan, you lead kirtan, you very much a lover of Krishna. Would you share what does your practice look like, or a little bit about your kirtan, but like what does your practice look like? And I ask because we've got actually two of our dear friends here, members of Happy Jack Yoga. They both happen to be in the state of Alabama. Shout out to them, and they're Christians, and they're also kind of open to this idea of bhakti and inspired by it. So could you just share a little bit about your personal practice and how you see that you can comfortably embrace the two traditions in that way?
Yeah, that's a really tough question though too. In some ways, at some times they'll be separate. They'll be like, okay, I'm going to church today. We're reading the Bible. We're doing this and that. We're saying prayers, Christian prayers. Sometimes I'm going to the Hindu temple and going to RT. We're doing this Bhagavad Gita class. So sometimes they're very separate like that. But then I have my own personal altar and my own personal practices that I do also too, where I kind of blur things a bit more. And I think I reconcile things to like the whole thing about Narayana and Christians worshiping. It's like basically what Professor Clooney said in there about like, I think there's nothing a Christian wouldn't say is true about Narayana. For me, having looked at it enough, I just kind of say like, well, it's the same God, and I'm just using these two forms, these practices. I do find the Bhakti practices fill in a lot of holes that aren't taught so well in the Christian tradition. A lot of kirtan, I would say kirtan is probably my main practice of chanting, aside from like studying and text and all that stuff. And I do take what I'm doing right now with the PhD studies and everything as a form of like overall seva, eventual seva and practice. So unfortunately, this takes up the bulk of my time. Day to day life is studying, but it's studying texts like these, like all these like these Christian saints, a lot of Hindu stuff. So a lot of it, I'm kind of in seva mode. I'm kind of in work mode. It's not like I chant 2 hours a day or something, which I wish I could. There's been times when my practice has been a lot better than it is right now, but I try, do what I can.
No, but that's perfect. Actually, that's really helpful to hear that perspective because there's different ways that we can embrace the practice of bhakti. And for some of you, maybe have the time to chant for hours a day. But what you're talking about, svadhyaya. I mean, you're talking about engaging the text, the scriptural study, self-inquiry, and then also with your kirtan. Again, we heard on the previous call with Raghu at the end, we were talking to that big XL who shared, and he has this love for music. And so now, we're inspired to see how can he take his love for hip hop, his love for music, and engage that in some devotional way. And, you're an academic, you're a smart guy. And so you've found a path to engage your devotion through studies. And you're also a musician. You're not really hyping it up too much, but Jess is like an incredibly talented musician, all the instruments, leads kirtan, regularly. You got something coming up next weekend if anybody's in Boston. And I think it's just a good reminder that it can look different for everybody, right? Some people go and spend time in India. Others are at Harvard, like you. Others are, sitting at home and doing community service in different ways. So it's beautiful. Let's see. I think we probably sneak in one question. We got CC from Sweet Home, Alabama.
Yes, thank you. I want to connect more with you because I've wanted to ask Jack this question I'm about to ask, but I don't know if his heart's in the right place for it. When with Hindu gods, what I'm reading and what I'm learning is that you wait for your answer. You wait for them to intervene. You wait for them to do whatever you've prayed for or given service for. With Christians, it's you speak it, and if it's God's will, it will happen. It'll be in your path, the path He's created. So, is the Hindu gods what is the purpose of Hindu gods? The gods, their work.
I think that really depends. I mean, and in the whole thing, when I was speaking of Hinduism, I really should have preempted that by specifically talking about Vaishnava practice in Hinduism, because there's so many. I mean, you can ask that question to somebody, and they'd be
Oh
like,
yeah.
"Oh, Ganesh answers my prayers when I do a puja or something." So, I mean, there's so many different ways to answer that question. But I think, my honest question is like that would be the same as kind of the Christian response, because I've heard this from swamis and stuff too, even about praying for other people. It's kind of like you can do that, but basically God's going to do what He wants to do. Like God isn't your order;
Yes.
He's not your wish fulfiller. Like that's not even like the right relationship to that kind of approach, especially in the bhakti path, where that song that I was quoting there is kind of like I don't want liberation, I don't want bhukti, I don't want wealth, I don't want this, I don't care about health. I just want to serve God. Whatever you want to do with me, treat me how you want. Like I think that's kind of more the approach. So I really don't know like if that answers your question, but I think I would say from some certain Hindu practices, like basically don't demand God to do things for you, and if He
Right.
wants to take time, or if He doesn't want to do it, that's God's business.
Yeah. With the Christian faith, we're supposed to pretty much renounce our flesh. But I've learned with Happy Jack that you need to be an intention. You need to listen to what's going on in your body because it's also where God wants you in your path. If it's resistance, don't do it. Or if there's resistance, it may be a big experience He wants to work through you and experience with your body. So I'm trying to wrap my head. I've been trying to wrap my head around the Bhagavad Gita, and there are tons of similarities with the Bible and the Gita. So I can get into that really easy and still worship my God, my Christian God. But I've also I love that all the different gods and goddesses are actually you can pull from them, you can learn from them, just not worship them in my faith. And I love that because it does work. So I want to learn more from you. If you have a website or something I can start really learning and digging deep, please let me know.
Yeah, I could put my email
No.
address in there in
Yes.
the chat, and yeah, any questions? I don't know how much you can learn from me, but I can refer you to some things to learn from.
Yeah. Well, do you have any classes or courses or anything yet? Or
Not exactly. I'm teaching
okay.
mostly kind of teaching assistant stuff right now, but yeah, there's resources I
He,
can
he
kind of
will
point
soon. He's going to graduate his PhD soon, and yeah, it's good. It's a good connection. I'm happy to see
Yes.
you to connect with Jess. But great question. Great. I just love your openness. I want to
Hmm.
be mindful of time, everyone's time here. But let's send some love, high vibes to CC, Sweet Home,
Thank you.
Alabama. Nice
Thank you.
work. Yeah,
Love
great
y'all.
question. And we'll wrap up just in essence of time. But Balaram, appreciate your presence and corrections on our pronunciation. We're doing our best, born over
out.
here in North America with our pronunciation, but we have a love for the tradition. So thank you for being here with us. But Jess, my friend, thank you for taking the time. Really thank you for being here and giving us this thorough, comprehensive, understanding, seeing how these two traditions, finding the similarities, right? Like it's so easy. Finding what's wrong in the world is so easy. We can put our attention on what's wrong, but I mean, what's right is always available. What's similar, what is the same is always there. And so I love that lens that you have in life, in your scholarship. It's very inspiring for us as practitioners. Appreciate your time, man.
All right, appreciate you. Thank you, everyone here. Honors, you're in great company. Jack's giving you guys the best. I mean, I'm a humble worm, just to quote Saint Teresa. But the rest of the speakers on here, woo, good stuff. Join the rest of them.
You too, man. Awesome. Well, my friends, thank you so much for taking the time to be here. Make it an amazing rest of the day. Hare Krishna.
Hare
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 Krishna.
Hare
Krishna.
Krishna.
Thank you.
Bye. Love y'all.
Krishna. Radhe Radhe.